Okay.
Okay. I'll kick it off, and we'll do a little bit of just who Vikram and I are at UiPath, and we'll do a couple of slides or two and just set the stage. And then I know customers and partners and prospects always want to see some stuff. But let me start by saying I'm going to go on the assumption of you all are familiar with UiPath. It's part of the community. And this session, we do these sessions a lot all over the place. We treat these as here is some new stuff at UiPath or stuff that you may be familiar with already, but there's always new things you can learn. And so if there are questions as we go and you either want to take yourself off mute or post a question in chat, we want to hear from you. This is a session for all of you, and pretty casual, I think. It's meant to be like a lunch and learn. So just a little bit about Vikram and I. I lead the sales side of the house for Test Suite, for UiPath, for the Americas. I'm actually based in Canada, and Canada is part of the Americas too. So US and Canada, and even sometimes South America. Sometimes we get engaged with customers that are interested in Test Suite in Central and South America as well. The Test Suite team is a sizable team at this point. We focus on customers that are either interested or sometimes bothly interested in how does Test Suite help them with better RPA testing. What are the differences typically between the non-production robots that we would traditionally ship when a customer became a UiPath RPA customer, and what can they do with Test Suite that is maybe better, different, solve some problems that they are encountering as they grow their RPA practice. And then the other side of it is purely quality assurance, application testing, quality engineering, that side of the house. And it is sometimes an overlap. Sometimes the RPA team is involved with application testing as well. Sometimes it is a completely other separate team within a customer organization. And sometimes it's even not really them. It's sometimes a lot of QA organizations are partly or very outsourced to a partner. And so our engagement in many organizations is partly talking to the customer and partly talking to their partner that is going to do their SAP ECC to S4 migration or their Workday deployment or ServiceNow or whatever it happens to be. So that's a little bit about us. And beyond this session, if this is interesting, we want to hear from you. We're part of the UiPath team. So, we work with customers, and, if we do this and this seems interesting, we can include our contact info in one way or another. We're as easy as send us an email and we'll figure it out with you guys, like whatever the right thing is. So with that, I'm going to try to share my screen. I'll take you through a few slides, hopefully not death by PowerPoint. And then I think we'll show you some stuff. Vikram will show you. Oh, I should have done an intro to who Vikram is. So Vikram is the way smarter side of the me. Vikram is our lead solution architect for our team. And honestly, you're in for a treat. Vikram is like awesome at these sorts of things and is good at if there are things that you as he goes through it, if there are things that you want to see specifically or answer questions, I will give a shout out to the fact that Vikram is incredibly good at finding content, sometimes even on the fly, sometimes to address a specific question as we go. So that's a little bit about us. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully this works. No, the whole window, maybe the window. Yes, I think it is this one. Is it coming through okay?
Yep.
Hopefully say yes. All right, good. Okay. Okay, so a few slides just to set the stage. So test automation, what is it? It is actually not, we call it Test Suite, but it is not a product. It is just a combination of things that are part of the UiPath platform. The main thing I would say is if you're an existing UiPath customer, you're pretty far the way along to actually having, again, what we would call Test Suite. It is, you build your tests in Studio or Automation Developer, as we call it now, and you manage them with Orchestrator, which I'm sure if you're a UiPath customer, you already have. There's a couple extra things, we'll go into them, but at a high level, it is organic capability as part of the UiPath platform. And when we say test automation, it is an automation with some specifics that are designed for testing as opposed to RPA. But I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's kind of it. It makes it an easy way to transition into testing, either for RPA or for QA. Who do we typically deal with? We deal with developers, we deal with technical testers, and we deal with business testers, all three of the above. It's a really interesting thing. You obviously have developers who want to test their automations or RPA automations. Technical testers, where does that fit in? In the QA world, a lot of the times you have a technical tester that you want to give them capability, but they're maybe not as sophisticated as a developer who would like code. So in the QA world, it would be something like if they were using Selenium and you want to extend QA capabilities to them, you end up with this like middle ground tester. And then business testers are in a real world sense. Let's say you have an automation, an RPA automation, and you want to have a subject matter expert in finance test that automation. If you think about your RPA world, how do you do that? You'd have to basically get somebody in finance and sign them up to like, hey, can you test this RPA automation and tell us whether you think it works? Did we cover all the, scenarios and so on and so forth? Test Suite is a really good way to build the test and then extend it to a business user to say, we don't need you to do everything. We need you to review the results and figure out, did we cover everything that you need? Are you happy with the results? Or do you see a defect? And so on and so forth. Problems that we solve for, super high level. This is a QA version, and then I'll cover RPA as well. So in the quality assurance world, the reality is most of the testing is done manually. Even though you talk to customers and they would like to be automated testing, mostly manual. And then the other issue, generally speaking, is very high cost. In an IT budget overall, this chart would say 40%. We see anywhere between, on the low end, the customers tend to admit that their QA would be like 15-ish% of the budget. And I would say more often they would say it's like 20-odd% of their budget, and it can be as high as 40% of the budget. And then more broadly, the other issue is not only are they spending a lot of money on testing, it's lousy. And it's getting more lousy as customers are moving from waterfall to agile, and the pressure to deploy code more often and more quickly is very, very high. And yet the problem is that the testing part of it hasn't changed. So if you go agile and your testing is still designed for, well, we typically would have 3 months to test or 6 months to test because we have 2 releases a year, there's like a mismatch between those things. And they want to deploy more quickly, and they need testing to accompany that plan. Like they need testing that fits with the reality of we're going to have a deployment every month, or frankly, in some cases, every week. So this is what they want to get to. They would like it to reverse. They want it to be 90% plus automated, and they want to keep manual to a minimum if possible, and they want to reduce the cost of it. And that is pretty heavy. I would say our team has, I would say in the last year, a few hundred separate customers that we've done engagements with, talked to, moved over to the Test Suite. This is what they're all trying to get to. And the reasons are pretty standard. They want to reduce the cost, and they want to have more coverage, and they want to have faster testing. RPA testing, which I'm guessing a lot of you are interested in. So we'll cover the how does it get done, but in the RPA testing world, I will just generically say non-production robots are a lousy way to test. It's basically manual testing. We give you like a robot that is effectively an unattended robot, and we say you can run your RPA process in a non-production environment, and you can run the test. Downsides to that, the things that break an RPA process, like you might have the greatest RPA process on the planet and it worked that first time you deployed it, but something is breaking your RPA process and there's a ton of pressure on RPA COEs. Like if the automation breaks and it's breaking in production, it's kind of like people didn't show up for work, and things can, go pretty badly from there. And the issue that we see, this is a pretty big survey that we did with 1,500 or so customers, and you guys may have been part of that survey. The reality is the things that are breaking RPA processes most of the time are not the actual RPA process. It's other things. It's like the application team made a change to Salesforce and didn't tell the RPA team, and now your RPA process is broken. Or there's like Windows patching and security patching and whatever else, environment changes, something changed, IT made a change, and suddenly your RPA process broke. It is not most of the time the automation. It is mostly other things that you guys don't control. And so Test Suite helps with those things to help you have better coverage of your RPA process and also understand all of the things that are going on with your environment, your applications, so that you can get ahead of breakages, or if there is a breakage, identify where is it and fix it more quickly. Last item, actually, I think I have 2 slides left, and then I'll turn it over to Vikram. Other things that we'll show you, because it's a single platform and it's organically built, the cool thing is if a company does go with Test Suite for automated testing and they're also a UiPath RPA customer, there's a ton of opportunity for reuse. So if your QA team is building, I don't know, let's say an order to cash test with Test Suite, and obviously a test is just a representation of what somebody would actually be doing, manually in production. They're actually doing order to cash parts of the process. Then the next part of the question is, well, are there things that we could just automate for RPA? And the nice thing is, if you've done the QA part of it, there's a ton of reuse opportunity to then say, okay, we're basically 60-70% of the way there to just doing that as an RPA process. And so we call that converged automation. You might call it just an opportunity to not have a silo of different things going on in the business, and we can have a single strategy for automation across the board. My last slide. Test Suite, even though everybody kind of thinks of it as super new and what is this new thing, it's actually been something that UiPath has worked on now for the better part of 4 years. We had customers that were using just regular RPA robots in one form or another for testing, like automated testing. And the company identified that as an opportunity, like what are the gaps that we need to close between what RPA users are doing and what a tester might need. And we established a team first, I think, in product, and then expanded out, obviously, as the product got better into sales and pre-sales and so on and so forth. And at this point, the product itself is very good. This is the IDC MarketScape for cloud testing from last year. I think April of last year it came out, and we're already considered a leader in the space. So even though companies think of UiPath as an RPA only company, and obviously we have DU and process mining and so on and so forth, they don't really think of us as a QA company. We're actually, I think, super solid in that space, as does the industry. And if you even go out and look at something like a G2 peer review, we're rated like at the top of the list for testing, and we're only continuing to get better. That's basically it. And I'll turn it over to Vikram. I don't know if there's questions in the chat as I turn it over, but if there are, we could try to do that.
Not yet, Josh. I think we're good.
Okay. Hopefully that wasn't too salesy. I can't help myself sometimes on that, but I hope it didn't feel as if it was too much of a pitch.
No worries, no worries. So let's go ahead and take a look at the technical side of things. Josh mentioned quite a few times that Test Suite, it's built upon UiPath's core existing capabilities. So when I say core capabilities, that's the studio to design automations that you're already familiar with. It's the orchestrator to manage automations that, again, you're familiar with, and the same robots to run the automations. So what's the net new components? Well, in Studio, we have a testing activity pack that includes testing activities like generating data, performing assertions, as well as a new type of workflow called a test case workflow that just behind the scenes is deployed a bit differently. Within Orchestrator, Test Suite adds a testing module. And again, you already have access to this if you have Orchestrator today. It just might require some installation changes. But the testing tab allows you to take any of the test case workflows built within Studio and organize them into a test set. Now, for those familiar with the testing space, test sets are a great way to scope exactly what you want to evaluate with regards to a workflow. Josh mentioned that a lot of things can change that impact a workflow. That can be application changes, IT changes, process changes. And if you want to test an application change across not just one project, but your entire RPA portfolio, Orchestrator allows you to define those test sets that then pick and choose the individual test cases from Studio workflows and execute them all at once without you having to manually go to each workflow and execute it individually. Lastly, we have the robots. While it's the same robot EXE product-wise, it is a different license type. So test robots are basically a set of your old legacy non-prod robots. They allow you to do everything non-prod robots could do in terms of executing a process, but now we're actually unit testing and regression testing our workflows and our applications. So that's why it's kind of a different robot license type. Now, the net new piece is going to be Test Manager. This allows you to bring in the rest of the kind of testing landscape and essentially analyze all of your test results. And so if we look at this in the open architecture viewpoint, testing is not new. You're likely already doing testing today, and testing fits inside your software development lifecycle. And so it is important that our automation portion of the piece have the ability to integrate with your existing software development lifecycle piece. And so on the left-hand side here, you'll see a number of different lifecycle connectors that we're able to integrate with. We have native integrations with Jira, X-Ray, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, and 43 more additional tools via our partnership with Test Manager Connect. On the flip side, from an automation perspective, we are able to integrate with source control tools. We're able to invoke open source legacy testing functionality like a Selenium. We're able to integrate with Appium for mobile automation, and we're able to integrate with Postman for API testing. The last and final part of the entire software development lifecycle is DevOps. And that's where integrating with CI/CD tools like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, GitLab, GitHub Actions becomes very important. And we're able to do that either with native integrations or with our universal command line interface for Orchestrator. Now, when it comes to application testing, I know you guys are familiar with this. We are able to automate any type of application. So whether it's SAP, Salesforce, a mainframe, mobile, API, Microsoft, Workday, ServiceNow, it doesn't really matter what your target application is. We are able to automate it because we have a number of ways to interact with that. And most importantly, because you are using this on the foundation of our RPA automation capabilities, you can assure that your test automations are going to be built with production grade automation capabilities. So they're going to be reliable even in the face of changes to your applications. So I'll pause there. Any questions? Again, feel free to come off mute or type into the chat your questions as we go.
Vikram, I have a question there.
Sure.
More on the left side, when we talk about the connectors, is there a document that typically customers can refer to as to what type of systems or applications are supported, in the sense that, if, for example, SAP Solution Manager, do you have both on-prem and cloud connector to SAP Solution Manager, or is it more cloud at this point? And then, so is there some kind of a roadmap document that tells us what's there in the current package and what's coming up in the future?
Yeah, so roadmap is always going to be covered under NDA, so we don't publish anything publicly. However, in terms of what is available now, docs.uipath.com is going to be the best section for that. And so if I want to go ahead and open up that, what I can do is just show you how I would navigate it. You'll notice that, again, if you visit documentation very regularly, we did upgrade the site, but I would scroll down over to Test Suite. From here, then I can choose my specific deployment option, whether it's I'm deployed on cloud, suite, automation suite, or standalone. And then you would click view all. And on the left-hand side, you'll be able to see ALM tool integrations. And so here I'm able to click on each one of these and see kind of the various integrations that are available and kind of learn more that way. The other way is to, again, use the search. And so if I wanted to search SAP Solution Manager, I can go here. And this is where I would learn a bit more on what are the prerequisites, what are the versions. It's all kind of covered within here. But to answer your question specifically for Solution Manager, we primarily integrate with the on-premise version. SAP's cloud version is relatively new. I don't think it's fully been deployed yet. And so we don't integrate with it just yet because it's so new on the SAP side. Awesome. Great question. Great. So if we take a look at the software development lifecycle, it's important to kind of set this groundwork before explaining how Test Suite works. When you are developing an application, whether it's releasing a new feature in Salesforce or building a homegrown application, every project goes through these phases. First, you have requirements. What does the business actually want to get out of the application? Designing, how will the developer build the application? What should the user interface look like? Things like that. The actual development of the application, and then the testing phase. And so this software development lifecycle, in translation, if we look at it in with our testing eyes on, the software development lifecycle also has something called the software testing lifecycle, which it's very similar in parallel. And if I dive deeper into the software development lifecycle, these are each of those phases. Requirements analysis, test planning, the actual development of my test cases, environment setup, execution, and reviewing of results. And so this is what we have to then do within the UiPath Test Suite platform. And so visually, if I show how these work within UiPath, it's going to look something like this. I might have an agile planning today, where I'm talking with the business and gathering those requirements. And because I have integrations with a large number of tools, I can make sure that I'm synchronizing those with Test Manager. Or if I don't have another tool, Test Manager also standalone can collect those requirements. Next, I move into the test design phase, right? Now that I know what the business wants, how am I going to test that the application meets the business quality guidelines? And that's where I would define my test cases. If I define them in an external tool, I can synchronize those test cases with Test Manager. And if I don't have an external tool, I can define those test cases within Test Manager. Why is that important? Well, now within Studio, I can build my automation. And I have to then link my automation back to my definition in Test Manager. And that linking is really important because now when I execute my automation, I'm going to be able to send those results back to my third-party tool, if I have one, and analyze the results. The test analysis is the final and most important piece of the closure, because how do I know whether my test case assertion passed or failed? And if it failed, whether or not I should create a defect on it and be able to track that and send that back to my application team or my RPA team, whoever is building whatever I'm testing. And so that's kind of all in all what it looks like. And for the full extensive list of what is supported right now from an integration perspective, we leverage PlanView TaskTop is the company. You can just go to their website and see all of the available integrations, and we can integrate with anything in that list. But that's enough about slides. Let's go ahead and see this in action. To showcase this, I'm going to walk through a sample scenario of an end-to-end test of our UI Bank platform. UI Bank is a dummy application but it has APIs, it has desktop applications, it has a web user interface, and it involves documents, kind of very similar to enterprise applications today. And so I want to evaluate whether I have the ability. My business requirement was that I should be able to create a new user. That new user should be able to work with the account, create accounts, make transactions within accounts. And so I want to walk through this entire end-to-end process. That process will involve creating a test email, right? Setting up my test environment, creating my new user, my test user within my UiBank platform. And I'm going to do that via the API. I'm going to then verify the user in our desktop app, which is an administrative application. And then I'm going to have the user log in and verify various operations by performing a transaction. Finally, actually, you won't see this part, but I would also be able to check the account balance on mobile because we do support mobile. But let's go ahead and see this in action. So what you see on the screen here is UiPath Studio. I'm actually going to pause real quick. In UiPath Studio, the workflow itself, the test case workflow, is going to look very similar to what you're already familiar with. However, some of the new functionality you'll see is that on the right-hand side, you'll be able to select a test explorer. And this is where you're going to be able to get a good view of all the workflows and test cases that you have at your disposal. Furthermore, within Studio, you're going to have a series of test activities. The first activities you see here are test data generation activities. I'm going to be able to generate a first name and a last name to create my test user. I'm also going to be able to make API requests. And so these could come from Postman as an example, or I could use my HTTP request activities. And finally, I'll be able to create reusable components, right? And so this is where configuring arguments and passing data in between these reusable components becomes really important. Because if I've already pre-built something reusable on my RPA side, I can use that. And the final piece is the verification activities. A test case should always have an assertion. Otherwise, it's just a standard automation. Now we'll go ahead and run this from Studio. Studio, again, has debugging mode if you're not familiar. But before running it, what I'll want to do is actually link my test case back to my test case definition. And so here we have my test case definition, and we see the reference from Test Manager, where I analyze my tests, back to my automation. And so I would just publish this. The test case gets published. Again, supports version control. And I can return back to Test Manager to execute the test cases. Now, behind the scenes, the automation is published to Orchestrator, but the good news is that as a tester, I don't need to mess with Orchestrator. I can do everything within Test Manager itself. I see my requirements. This is what the business wanted to actually evaluate. I can map this test case, this requirement to a specific test case. And now this test case is automated. So if I want to pick and choose which test cases I want to execute as part of my test set, I can do that and link them accordingly. From Test Manager, when I choose to execute an automation, behind the scenes, this automation starts on via Orchestrator on my robot. And now we'll see my robot in action. It's going to go ahead and take that random email and create a user. Again, that user was created via API, and I'm going to be verifying that that user was created via my desktop application. So searching for that user, I can dynamically wait for responses from my applications. I can then see my user, and then I'm going to verify that user again via my email. Since the user is now validated, I'm going to put my user persona hat on, and I'm going to log in with that new user. I'm going to go ahead and apply for a new account, a checking account. I'm going to then apply for a savings account. And then I'm going to verify that I can actually transfer money from one account to the other. And to do that, I'm going to also verify my PDF transaction history to verify documents within my application. Oh, I guess this video does show the mobile piece. So for mobile automation, we can interact both with real devices or cloud providers. Here you see a cloud provider, Sauce Labs, where Sauce Labs provides the mobile devices for me, and I can just connect with them. And so here we see my robot communicating with this device, sending commands to log into this UI Bank web page, and then validate the account balance. Now, Test Manager, as I mentioned, it's a very important piece because this is where the evaluation and understanding of my results happens. And so within Test Manager, I have a very organized view of all the assertions that I performed throughout the test case. And in this case, I performed 7 assertions, all passed, and I have the evidence with screenshots of exactly what happened at each point in time. We can also connect with mainframes. So this is just showing an example of mainframe automation as well. So again, it doesn't really matter the application, we can interact with it. And that's kind of a quick overview of how it works. So again, I'll pause one more time. I think the next topic that we wanted to cover quickly was RPA testing prior to jumping into how we can potentially use AI to accelerate this as well. Great. So again, this is kind of an illustrative example of the software development lifecycle, but now in an RPA testing context. For RPA testing, I'm capturing requirements typically in Automation Hub. What is the actual process? What does the business want? I document it with Task Capture. I build it within Studio. Now, this is where I have the unique ability within RPA testing to build my test cases. I'm building my application, my automation in this case. And then I am organizing my RPA workflow and building it out. I want to build it out with in mind. It allows you to enhance things like unit testing and regression testing and share artifacts from your RPA team with your app testing teams. So here we see an RPA project that should typically contain reusable components that you can either invoke as workflows or use as libraries. And we also want to make our objects, our selectors, reusable as well.
Did we lose Vikram?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think we lost him. Hold on, maybe less than 5 seconds ago. Thanks. Yes, yes, he did. Yeah. Hold on. Let me. I'll send him a Slack just in case he lost a connection here. Okay. You know what we could do while we're waiting for him? Any comments or questions or anything? Feel free to put in chat or take yourself off mute. I'm gonna ping Vikram while we do that. We lost him. So maybe there we go. We'll give him a second to come back.
Yep.
Anybody have any questions while we wait for him to rejoin? Great session. Brought a lot more clarity. Good. That's good. Okay. Can I ask in the chat, did most of you join for RPA testing or app testing or a little bit of both? Any initial thoughts or possible use cases, like for all of you? Oh, he's back.
Okay, I'm back.
All right, give it a second. Give it a second here. Okay, so I was taking the time while you were unfreezing yourself to ask like what was the comments or what they were thinking about using, and so far we got at least one. We got two. One was great session, that's good, and two, I said, is this app testing or RPA testing for them? And so far we got one volunteer bravely said RPA testing.
Cool.
So far, yeah.
Awesome. So let's dive a bit deeper into what exactly, when we say RPA testing, what is it? Well, RPA testing is actually very similar to app testing in the fact that instead of an application being a browser or a desktop application, it's the automation itself. So we are testing the functionality of being able to interact with other applications, perform a process, etc. And so when organizing our tests, we have two types. We can either test the entire workflow end to end and evaluate the business logic of it, right? If I pass in transaction data 1 versus transaction data 2, do they follow the proper pathways within my workflow? That's what we define as end-to-end tests. And where oftentimes organizations have trouble today with end-to-end tests is that they don't have the data or they don't have access to dummy application. And so Test Suite helps because 1, you can generate synthetic data. 2, you can create automations that help you prep your test environment. And 3, you can now pass those data variations into your workflow without having to build anything net new. It's as simple as right-clicking a workflow and saying add test data. And we have integrations with Excel files or data service or orchestrator data queues. In addition, there's a feature called mocking. Mocking allows you to essentially take portions of your workflow and replace them with predefined logic. And so this is especially helpful if, let's say, I have an RPA workflow that works with a sensitive third-party application. And the third party will not provide me a demo instance of it. Well, anytime I interact with that third-party application, I can pretend it's a positive response or simulate a failed response and check whether the business logic in my RPA workflow handles that third-party response accordingly. And so even if that third-party response gives me an error, well, I tested that scenario. It's going to then create a ticket for me or send an email to that third party and say there's an issue. Can you please resolve it, right? In situations where things are out of your control, mocking allows you to bring it back into your control and at least test the portions or the logic that is available to you. Now, apart from end-to-end tests, unit testing or testing the individual components of your automation are very helpful because it allows you to pinpoint exactly where something failed, because I don't have to test step A, B, C, D, E very sequentially in an end-to-end test. I can now jump to E, jump to C. And if I know those components are changing, well, I can just test those components. And that accelerates my testing timelines because now I can test more scenarios, etc. And so selector testing allows me to test the individual objects that I define in an object repository. So navigate to a screen and check whether that selector is still valid. Or I can test my libraries or my workflows, my individual components, and just check that individual logic outside of the larger end-to-end context. Lastly, all of this, as I build out tests, I also have a metric called activity coverage. And activity coverage allows me to evaluate whether or not I need to define more scenarios, etc. Or whether I have tested everything and I don't need to define anything more. Yeah, so Kamalan, I'm not sure if that's a question or not, but yes, mocking typically happens in parallel with the development. And so what essentially mocking allows you to do is create a duplicate version of your main workflow. So as your changes are made to the main workflow, changes are going to be synchronized with the mock, and you can make changes to the mock portions and not impact the main workflow. And so that's kind of how mocking testing happens in parallel. But great. As far as additional demo videos or content, definitely take a look at our YouTube channel. We had a short time today, so I definitely wanted to jump to our last and final topic of UiPath and AI. So this is kind of a high-level overview of all of the AI components that were recently covered in our AI Summit. AI computer vision is a method of being able to interact with applications, and rather than relying on selectors, we can actually allow robots to see the screen via screen OCR. And so we're going to get the ability to analyze and view buttons or labels or text fields, etc. And so this is super helpful in situations where I don't have the ability or for some reason UiPath isn't identifying a specific component of my application. Clipboard AI is an idea of being able to analyze a document or a form or data and enter it somewhere else without having to build each field one by one. Clipboard AI accelerates that data entry automation process. Project Wingman is a new NLP-based method of creating your automations. And that's going to be very heavy in Studio Web, which again, as Josh mentioned, is a new UI that is designed and targeting those business testers. And so that testing is available on Studio Web, but it is in preview, so definitely worth viewing. Communications mining allows you to use NLP to analyze emails and communication data. Forms AI allows you to extract data from structured documents. And lastly, Ask GPT is a new activity package that allows you to either ask data activities, ask information for documents, or there is also a use case for testing. And so that's what we wanted to dive a bit deeper into, is that use case for testing. So I'm bringing over my application screen. Let's take this application as an example. It's a public web site. And as long as it's a public website or something Chat GPT has access to, we can likely follow this scenario. I'm going to just copy this URL, and I'm going to ask Chat GPT, please give me 5 test scenarios for that website. And it all of a sudden comes up with 5 test scenarios. If you're using I actually did this on the newer version, GPT-4. And in GPT-4, it actually gave me a breakdown step-by-step of all of the individual scenarios. And so just like that, if I don't know what the scenario should be, ask GPT, and you can create a workflow that does this for you as well. It will define the step-by-step, and now your testers don't have to do a lot of heavy lifting. They can just review the scenarios one by one. Or I can say something like, please write me a scenario where I add and I verify the ability to add and remove an item from my cart, refresh the page, and the item stays removed. Do this in, again, describing the scenario. If I can't think of what the steps should be, this helps write all of the steps out for me. And I can then easily build an RPA automation that takes the response from Chat GPT and enters it into my agile planning or my test management tool. That's kind of the next step in this. Now, Chat GPT is good not only for coming up with test scenarios that are valid, it can also help me generate test data. And so, as an example, let me jump over to the GPT-3, which is a bit faster. Please provide me 5 rows of test data for scenario 1. And it spits that out. And so, as something like, notice if I go here and take this data and I go to my shopping cart and search for it, it doesn't appear. So you can have a conversation with ChatGPT. And that's exactly what I did here. So let's go to this historical conversation. For scenario 1, here's 5 rows of test data. I then said, wait, stop. I want you to put it in a CSV format. And so then it gave it to me in a CSV format. I then said, none of this test data exists in my application. And so they said, I apologize. I don't have access to your application. So here is a general format of what your test data should look like. So then I asked, what's the best way to find this info in the demo app? Well, it did some research and it realized, oh, it does have access to the source code. And so this is how you get access to the source code. And it then spit out this test data for me. And so now I took this test data and I was like, let me check if this new test data is available. And I saw that it was. And so that's the power of ChatGPT, is in scenarios where you have to generate a lot of data, or you want to generate relational data, right? This is where there are enterprise tools out there that organizations pay a lot of money for, that you can do the same thing in ChatGPT. So please generate random test data for name, age, and likely and income. Age and income should be relational, such that the higher the age, the higher the income. And so
how much will I make when I'm 100 years old?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Probably make 400K or something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah. But so it's now very easy to take this information, and with our Ask GPT activity, which is available on the marketplace, which I had it open, but let me just put this in the chat right now. You can take this and build larger workflows. But that's about it. I know we have about 3 minutes left, and definitely want to answer any last minute questions that may be there, but just some ways that you can expand what you're doing within UiPath today.
Any final feedback? By the way, pretty good. I think we maybe lost one person, maybe not even.
No,
I'll call that a success.
We were pretty good, I think. Right on time, right on the agenda, what we were thinking to cover. So this is great. Thank you, Josh, you and Vikram. I think this is awesome.
For sure. I'm going to be brave and say, Rahul, if you want to send out my contact info for anybody who has further questions, totally okay.
Yep, let me.
I can put it in. I can put it in chat if.
Yeah,
if
we can
that's
put
the
it in
best
the
way to do it.
chat. If you want to just copy your signature, or I can copy it also.
Yeah, I'll just put it. I'll just put in Joshua.overland@uipath.com. Just make sure I didn't screw it up. There it is. So if anybody has questions and they want to reach out, please do. Seriously.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks again, Josh and Vikram. This was a great session.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.